The first time Odessa Trenton showed up at my door holding a clipboard like it was a badge of honor, I knew she was going to be a problem. She had that certain look, tight curls sprayed into place, oversized sunglasses even though it was cloudy, and that pinched expression like she'd just tasted sour milk. She tapped her pen against the board like a ticking clock. "Mr. Dorian Elwood," she began, drawing out my name like she was trying to remember if I was on her hit list. "There's been a formal complaint." I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe. My dog, Rocco, padded up beside me, tail wagging. "About what?" I asked, already knowing. Odessa squinted down at her paper. "Noise disturbance. Your dog has been barking excessively during daylight hours. It's disturbing the peace." I looked at Rocco. He looked back at me. Then he yawned. "He barked once yesterday when the mailman came." I said, "That's not excessive." She clicked her pen. "It's cumulative, Mr. Elwood. There have been 3 reports filed in the last week." "Let me guess," I said. "You filed all 3? She didn't answer. Instead, she cleared her throat and handed me a typed letter with the HOA letterhead, the Pecan Ridge Community Association. I'd been living here for 6 months, and Odessa had been sniffing around my property since week 1. She was the HOA vice president, and from what I'd gathered, she ran the board like a dictator with a grudge. I glanced at the paper. "You're threatening me with a fine?" She nodded, lips tight. $50 for the first offense. Increases with each violation. If the barking continues, the board will consider further action. Further action? I raised a brow. "Like what? Banning my dog?" She didn't even blink. "If necessary." That's when I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Lady, do you even know who Rocco is?" She sniffed. "A nuisance. He's a retired police K-9. Served 7 years with the county sheriff's department. He's trained, obedient, and probably better behaved than half the people on this street." Odessa stepped back, clearly caught off guard. "That doesn't exempt him from the rules." "No," I said, "but it does mean you're barking up the wrong tree." I shut the door. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, it escalated. I got 3 more notices, each one more absurd than the last. One claimed Rocco was intimidating to children walking past the house. Another accused me of harboring a dangerous animal. The final one just said, "Final warning, immediate compliance required." I'd had enough. I called in a favor from my buddy Nate, who still worked for the department. He sent over a full service record for Rocco commendations, training certificates, incident reports, you name it. I made copies and attached them to my formal response to the HOA. The next HOA meeting was on a Thursday evening in the clubhouse. I made sure to show up early, Rocco at my side. The moment we walked in, every head turned. Rocco didn't bark, growl, or even flinch. He just sat beside my chair like a statue. Odessa was already seated at the head of the table, flanked by the other board members, 2 yes men, and a woman who looked like she was regretting every life decision that led her there. Odessa narrowed her eyes at Rocco. "Animals aren't allowed inside the clubhouse." "He's not a pet," I said. "He's a service animal, registered and retired law enforcement. You want to tell him to leave? Go ahead. I'll film it." She didn't say a word. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and handed out the packets I prepared. Each one had Rocco's full record and a cover letter citing the Americans with Disabilities Act and the state's laws protecting retired service animals. "Your complaints are baseless," I said, "and your threats are borderline harassment. If you continue, I'll be filing a formal complaint with the city and the sheriff's department. Not to mention a civil suit for defamation." Odessa opened her mouth, but I wasn't done. "You want to talk about noise complaints? I've got a list of residents who've had issues with your dog barking at all hours. Should I submit those next?" That shut her up. I left the meeting with Rocco walking proud beside me. I should have felt victorious. But I knew Odessa. She wasn't the type to back off quietly. I had a feeling she was just getting started. I was right. 3 nights later, I caught someone sneaking around my backyard. Rocco alerted me before I even heard the gate creak. I flipped on the floodlights and stepped outside with a flashlight and my phone ready to record. The figure froze. It was a man mid-50s, balding, wearing a windbreaker. I recognized him. Greg, Odessa's lapdog and the HOA treasurer. "What the hell are you doing in my yard?" I barked. He stammered something about checking for code violations. At 9:30 at night, I took a step forward. "Get off my property before I call the police." He bolted like a scared rabbit. I installed cameras the next morning. That week, I started hearing whispers from neighbors. Odessa had been going door to door, spinning stories about Rocco being a danger to the community. One neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, told me Odessa claimed Rocco had attacked a child in the past. Total lie. That was the final straw. I filed a complaint with the city, backed with all the evidence. I had video of Greg trespassing, copies of the false notices, testimony from neighbors, and Rocco's spotless record. I also submitted a restraining order request against Odessa on the grounds of harassment. Then I waited. And Odessa, true to form, made her biggest mistake yet. 3 days after I filed the restraining order paperwork, a deputy from the county courthouse showed up to serve Odessa. From what I heard, she didn't take it well. I wasn't there for the moment she was handed the envelope, but later that day, I watched her storm across the street to her car, slamming her doors so hard it rattled the windows of her Cadillac. She peeled out of the neighborhood like she was late for a fire. I figured she might finally back off after a legal slap on the wrist. But instead, her next move revealed just how deep her obsession ran and how far the HOA's corruption stretched. That Friday, I came home from work to find a bright orange notice duct taped to my garage door. Not placed, duct taped, in 3 corners. It was a cease and desist order allegedly issued by the HOA's compliance subcommittee, a group I'd never heard of before, and I'd read the bylaws front to back. The letter accused me of willful endangerment of community safety and stated that Rocco was now classified as a Level 3 threat animal. I stared at the document. It wasn't just fabricated, it was laughably unprofessional. The header was a blurry image of the HOA's logo, and the body of the letter had multiple misspellings. They even used the wrong street name once. I took it straight inside, photographed it, and called my attorney, a guy named Marcus I'd worked with back when I was still doing security consulting. He specialized in property law and HOA disputes, and the moment I emailed him the photo, he called me back. "This letter's a joke," Marcus said. "It has no legal standing. It's not even signed by a licensed attorney, which means they're impersonating legal authority. That's a felony in this state." I asked him what my next move should be. "Let them dig their own grave," he said. "Just keep collecting everything. If they're dumb enough to keep making up committees and issuing fake legal threats, they're going to give us everything we need." I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, I woke up to find my backyard gate wide open. Rocco was still inside, thankfully, but the latch had clearly been tampered with. Someone had wedged a screwdriver into the latch box, bending the metal enough that it no longer latched properly. I checked the security footage, and there it was at 4:13 a.m. A hooded figure slipped into the yard, crouched by the gate for nearly 2 minutes, and slipped out again. I couldn't make out the face, but I sent the footage to Marcus and the sheriff's department. That evening, I got a call from Deputy Morales, a young guy I'd worked with during my consulting days. He'd been assigned to the case. "We reviewed the footage," Morales said, "and we're treating this as attempted animal endangerment. You were smart to install those cameras. It's clear someone's targeting your dog." I asked what they could do. "If we can identify who entered your property, they'll be charged with criminal trespass and possibly attempted malicious harm to an animal. Do you have any reason to believe this is connected to the HOA?" I told him about the fake letter, the restraining order, and the escalating harassment. He didn't say it out loud, but I could hear the shift in his voice. This wasn't just a neighborly feud anymore. This was starting to look like a coordinated campaign. By Monday, news had spread. Not because I told anyone, but because Odessa did. She went door to door again, this time with a petition. I only found out because my neighbor, Carl, stopped me while I was taking out the trash. "She's telling people your dog's a liability," he said, lowering his voice. "Says you're planning to sue the HOA for money and that you're trying to evict her from the board." I stared at him. "Evict her? She claims you're organizing a recall vote. Says you want to take over the board." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe how delusional she was. "I haven't said a word to anyone about replacing the board." Carl nodded. "Yeah, well, if you ever do, I'd vote for you in a heartbeat." Later that night, I checked the HOA's website. Sure enough, a new section had been added, Community Safety Initiatives. It featured a crudely written article titled, Understanding Threat Animals and Planned Communities. The article didn't mention me or Rocco by name, but it included a stock photo of a German Shepherd and a list of warning signs, including military or police training history and aggressive posture. I took screenshots. Marcus was going to have a field day with this. The next big break came from an unexpected place. One of the board members, Sandra, showed up at my door looking like she hadn't slept in days. She was the only one on the board who ever looked remotely uncomfortable during meetings, and now I knew why. "I can't do this anymore," she said, wringing her hands. "I didn't sign up for this. Odessa's completely out of control." I stepped aside and let her in. "She's forging documents," Sandra said as soon as she sat down. "That letter you got? She typed that herself. The compliance subcommittee doesn't exist. She made it up. And Greg, he's the one who broke into your yard. She told him it was just a routine inspection. He didn't even know what he was doing until you threatened to call the cops." I asked if she'd be willing to give a statement. She hesitated. "If I do, she'll retaliate. She's already threatened to reassign my position if I don't vote the way she wants." "You're protected as a whistleblower," I said. "And if she's threatening you, that's coercion. That's a criminal offense." She agreed to provide a written statement to my attorney with the condition that her name wouldn't go public unless absolutely necessary. Marcus said it was enough to move forward. That week, we filed a civil complaint against the HOA board for defamation, harassment, abuse of power, and falsification of official documents. We also submitted Sandra's testimony to the sheriff's department as part of the criminal investigation into the gate tampering. The fallout came faster than I expected. The sheriff's department executed a search warrant on the HOA's office, which was little more than a converted storage unit behind the clubhouse. They found hard copies of Odessa's fabricated notices, including several drafts of the fake Level 3 threat designation, complete with notes in her handwriting. They also found a list of targets residents she'd labeled as non-compliant or problematic. I was at the top. The list included notes like "monitor closely," "encourage fines," and even "research background." It was chilling. The next HOA meeting was packed. Word had gotten out, and nearly every homeowner in the neighborhood showed up. The moment Odessa entered the room, people fell silent. She tried to open the meeting with her usual smug authority, but this time, no one listened. Marcus stood up and handed her a formal notice of the civil suit in front of everyone. Then Deputy Morales stepped forward and announced that Odessa was under investigation for multiple charges, including document forgery, harassment, and conspiracy to commit trespass. She tried to interrupt, but no one was interested in hearing her side. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Rocco lay quietly at my feet the entire time, completely unfazed. By the end of the meeting, the board had voted to suspend Odessa indefinitely, pending the outcome of the investigation. Greg resigned on the spot. Sandra, now emboldened, was named interim president. As residents began filing out of the clubhouse, several stopped to shake my hand. Some apologized for not speaking up sooner. Others just scratched behind Rocco's ears and called him a good boy. He was. And now, finally, the neighborhood was starting to see that too. The thing about people like Odessa is that they never believe the rules apply to them. For years, she'd operated like she owned the neighborhood, weaponizing the HOA to push her weight around. Losing her seat, even temporarily, wasn't something she could stomach. That much was clear the moment she showed up at the next emergency board meeting uninvited, unannounced, and completely unrepentant. The clubhouse had been rearranged since the last meeting. Sandra sat at the head table now, flanked by two new interim board members elected by the residents during a special vote held just days after the scandal broke. Odessa walked in wearing a fitted crimson blazer like she was stepping onto a courtroom floor instead of into a neighborhood meeting. The room quieted, but no one stood to acknowledge her. Sandra didn't miss a beat. She tapped the mic once and looked straight at Odessa without blinking. "As you've been informed by both legal counsel and the sheriff's department," she said, "you are no longer permitted to participate in board proceedings pending the outcome of the investigation." Odessa didn't sit. She stood just behind the last row of chairs, arms folded, staring at me like I'd personally toppled her empire. Maybe I had. But it wasn't out of spite. It was out of necessity. The meeting's agenda was short: reorganize the budget, approve temporary oversight of enforcement actions, and propose new transparency measures. Odessa didn't speak during any of it. She just stood there, unmoving, like she was waiting for an opening. I didn't give her one. Afterward, as I was leaving, someone tapped me on the shoulder. A man I didn't recognize, mid-30s, dressed casually but with that alert posture you only find in people used to watching their backs. "I'm Mason," he said. "I live over on Hickory Drive. I used to be on the board. Before Odessa pushed me out, I raised an eyebrow. She claimed I violated the conflict of interest clause, he said, voice low, because I was consulting part-time for a property management company. But really, I caught her doctoring maintenance invoices. She padded them, then rerouted the excess through a fake vendor account. That made me pause. You have proof? He nodded. I didn't back then, but I do now. I've been collecting statements, cross-checking payments. I was waiting for the right time to bring it forward. You just found it, I said. We met the next evening in my garage. I'd converted the back half into a workspace with a fold-out table, an old corkboard, and a laptop that had survived 3 moves and 1 coffee spill. Mason brought a manila folder bursting with printouts, bank records, vendor lists, and scanned invoices. It was meticulous. She created a shell company, he said, flipping through the pages. Called it Clearview Outdoor Services. It billed the HOA for landscaping and maintenance things like mulch, tree trimming, irrigation system upgrades. But half the work was never done. I checked with the actual crew. They said they only show up once every few months. He laid out a spreadsheet with side-by-side comparisons. The real charges from the landscaping company were a fraction of what Clearview billed. Where's the money going? I asked. Mason tapped a line on a bank statement. She set up a corporate account under her nephew's name. He lives out of state, but I found a copy of the business registration. Odessa used her own email address for correspondence. We photographed everything, digitized the paper trail, and backed it up 3 ways. Then I called Marcus. This isn't just harassment anymore, he said after reviewing the files. We're looking at embezzlement, wire fraud, and potentially conspiracy to defraud the homeowners association. If we hand this to the DA, they'll run with it. They did. And things moved fast. 2 days later, Odessa was arrested outside a tanning salon in town. The news spread like wildfire. Her mugshot hit the local paper's front page with the headline, HOA president accused of embezzling thousands. A formal audit was ordered by the city, and a special task force was assigned to oversee the HOA's financial records going back 5 years. But the real fallout came from the homeowners themselves. People who'd been silent for years suddenly started speaking up. Stories came pouring in. One man said Odessa fined him for a cracked driveway, then offered to waive the penalty if he hired her cousin's paving company. A widow on Maple Lane said she'd been threatened with foreclosure over unpaid dues she'd paid on time each month, but the records had been lost. A retired teacher revealed that she was fined for having a wheelchair ramp not in compliance, but when she asked for the code, she was told it was a discretionary violation. It all began to unravel. The city issued a temporary injunction halting all HOA enforcement actions until the audit was complete. Sandra and the new board approved a full transparency initiative, monthly financial reports posted publicly, open voting on all new rules, and the removal of any discretionary enforcement powers. I stayed mostly in the background, letting the process unfold. But I kept Rocco close. Not because I thought anyone would try anything again, but because he'd become something of a symbol. Neighbors would wave when we walked by. Kids he used to cross the street now came up to pet him. Even the mailman brought him treats. One afternoon, I got a letter from the sheriff's department. Morales had sent it personally. It was a thank you, along with a formal notice that the attempted trespass charge against Greg had been upgraded to conspiracy after he confessed to participating in Odessa's scheme. He'd agreed to a deal in exchange for full cooperation. The state's attorney filed formal charges against Odessa's 6 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of falsifying public documents, and 1 count of criminal conspiracy. If convicted, she'd be facing serious time. But it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the neighborhood healing from years of quiet oppression. People started repainting their homes in colors they actually liked. Garden flags reappeared. Porch swings were reinstalled. The block started to feel like a community again, not a surveillance zone. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and cast long shadows across the sidewalk, Sandra stopped by. She wasn't wearing her board badge, just jeans and a weathered hoodie. I wanted to say thank you, she said, for not backing down, for setting it in motion. I didn't do it alone, I said. You stepped up when it counted. She hesitated, then added, we're drafting new bylaws. Real ones. With checks and balances. No more committees with made-up names. We're even adding a clause that requires board members to pass a background check. About time, I said. She reached down to scratch Rocco's head. He changed more than just her life. Didn't he? He always does, I said. We stood there a minute longer, listening to the peaceful quiet of a neighborhood rediscovering itself. Somewhere down the street, a kid laughed. A wind chime tinkled from someone's porch. A sprinkler clicked on. No barking. Just calm. For the first time in a long while, it felt like home. The final cracks in Odessa's facade came not with a bang, but with a dry, clinical audit report delivered by the city's compliance division. The document was over 80 pages, filled with ledger discrepancies, vendor inconsistencies, and a pattern of misappropriation that stretched back almost a decade. I didn't get to read it right away. Copies had been issued to the interim board, the DA's office, and the state's HOA oversight committee, but Sandra called me the moment she finished it. They were funneling funds through a second dummy company, she said. This one ran under a fake landscaping permit linked to an address that doesn't even exist. I sat back in my chair, Rocco curled up under the table. How much did they take? Over $75,000, she said quietly. The worst part? They were collecting emergency infrastructure fees 2 years ago after that storm. Not a cent of it went to repairs. I didn't say anything. The clubhouse roof hadn't been fixed until last month. That explained why it always leaked during meetings. Sandra exhaled. The city's forwarding everything to the state attorney general. It's officially out of our hands. That weekend, subpoenas were issued for every former board member who'd served with Odessa during the last 5 years. Greg was already cooperating. He'd traded his testimony for reduced charges, but 2 others had gone silent. One moved out of state a week after Odessa's arrest. Another lawyered up immediately. The DA's office held a press conference at City Hall. A clean-cut prosecutor in a gray suit outlined the charges: embezzlement, falsification of public records, misuse of HOA funds, and obstruction of a municipal audit. The most serious charge, fraud exceeding $25,000, was a felony. If convicted, Odessa could face nearly 20 years. None of that surprised me. What had surprised me was what came next. The prosecutor mentioned a secondary investigation, one involving unlawful surveillance and retaliatory behavior toward multiple residents. They'd uncovered a collection of private emails on Odessa's laptop, including messages to a private investigator she'd hired. The emails revealed she'd paid him to dig into homeowners who had filed complaints or challenged HOA decisions. That included me. According to the DA, the investigator had been paid in cash almost $6,000 over several months. He trailed cars, photographed backyards, and even monitored social media activity. One resident, a single mother who'd spoken out at a board meeting last year, had been reported to Child Protective Services under false pretenses. The complaint was anonymous, but the IP address traced back to Odessa's home Wi-Fi. When that was announced, the room went silent. A few reporters gasped. The press conference ended with one final statement. The AG's office was considering expanding the case into a full racketeering investigation. By the following week, the neighborhood changed again, but this time with a sense of finality. The clubhouse was closed for renovations, the old board's portraits were taken down, and a professional property management company was hired to oversee day-to-day operations. Their first act was to hire an independent ombudsman, a third-party mediator, to handle any future disputes. I didn't attend the next few meetings. I didn't need to. Things were moving in the right direction without me. But I did start getting visitors, neighbors dropping by with questions about their property rights, young couples asking how to read their bylaws, retirees wanting to know how to serve on advisory panels. I helped where I could. Quietly. From my garage, desk, or front porch. Rocco sat nearby, watching the street like he always did. One afternoon, a man in a brown blazer with a leather folder stopped by. He introduced himself as Kenneth Daly, an investigator with the state's HOA Oversight Task Force. He'd been assigned to gather community statements for the racketeering inquiry. I know you've already given plenty of testimony, he said, but we're building a broader picture. What happened here wasn't isolated. He asked if I'd heard from anyone in the HOA system outside our neighborhood. I hadn't. But I told him about Mason, the former board member, with the evidence and Sandra's efforts to rework the bylaws from the ground up. Has anyone tried to retaliate again? Daly asked. Not since the indictments, I said. Most of them are either cooperating or hiding. He nodded and jotted something down. We believe there's a loose network. Certain HOA board members across the county who share tactics, even vendors. This wasn't just about money. It was about control. When he left, I stood on the porch and watched his car disappear around the bend. I'd never considered how far Odessa's reach might have gone beyond our streets. But now, with state investigators involved, it was clear this was bigger than any of us knew. Spring crept in slowly. The Bradford pears bloomed, the sidewalks filled with chalk drawings, and the community newsletter switched to a new format, plain, factual, and free of the passive-aggressive tone it used to have. Sandra had asked me to write a column about K-9s and their role in community safety. I declined, but I did agree to let them publish a photo Rocco in front of the flagpole, his vest polished and his eyes alert. One evening, Sandra came by again. She brought a glass plaque with my name etched at the bottom and a simple inscription, "For integrity and service to the community." "This isn't from the board," she said. "It's from the people." We passed it around for signatures. I looked at the back. Dozens of names. Some I barely knew. All in different handwriting. "I didn't do it alone," I said. "No," she replied, "but you did it first." She left before I could argue. A week later, Odessa's trial date was announced. She pled not guilty on all counts, but the evidence was overwhelming. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Between the financial records, the surveillance emails, and the testimony from Greg, Mason, and Sandra, the jury only deliberated for 4 hours before returning a unanimous guilty verdict. Sentencing came a month later. 17 years with no chance of parole before 12. She cried, but not out of remorse. Just disbelief. Like she still couldn't understand how it had come to this. The court also ordered restitution to the community. The state froze her assets, and a portion went toward repairing HOA infrastructure and reimbursing residents who'd been fined under false pretenses. The rest went into a community trust fund, overseen by an independent committee. It wasn't justice in the cosmic sense, nothing could undo years of manipulation, but it was justice in the legal sense. And sometimes, that's enough. On the day Odessa was taken into custody, I sat on the porch with Rocco and watched a few kids ride their bikes down the street without glancing over their shoulders. One of them waved. I waved back. After a while, Mason pulled up in a dusty pickup, stepped out, and leaned against the railing. "They're talking about using your case as a teaching model," he said. "Who's they?" "State training seminars. For HOA boards. They want to show what happens when power goes unchecked." I nodded. "Good. Maybe someone else won't have to go through this." He looked at Rocco. "You keeping him in retirement?" "As long as he likes the porch," I said. We were quiet for a while. Then Mason asked, "You ever think about joining the board?" "For real?" "No," I said. "I think I'm more useful as the guy that keeps them honest." He grinned. "Yeah, that tracks." Eventually, he drove off. The sun dipped behind the rooftops, casting long shadows over the lawn. Rocco stretched, stood, and padded toward the steps. I followed him down to the sidewalk. The air was warm, the breeze light, peaceful. And this time, it wasn't temporary.